Last week, I kind of skipped this one. Let me talk about this one, though, because I was reading some more about it this week, and a lot of controversy about it. Some people are like, yeah, this is real, and some people are like, no, this is absolutely not. So, take from it what you want. All I'm going to do is present the facts and the findings of the people who found it, and know that there are people who are like, this isn't what it really is. Alright, so this is the archaeology of Joshua. Evidence for what the Bible says about Joshua and what he did. Right? Specifically, Mount Ebal, or the Mount of Curses. Right? So this is Mount Ebal here in the background, if you look. We've got the mountain in the back there, Mount Ebal. And you'll note that the little drawing on this plaque, we're going to see that again.
Looks like a landfill.
Kinda. It's not a huge mountain, but it's pretty big compared to everything else around it. And you gotta remember, this is Israel, northern Israel. Let's see if I got it. All right, so here's Mount Ebal in the Bible. Right? Then Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, in Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the sons of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones. That's going to be important that we say uncut stones, on which no man had wielded an iron tool. And they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. This is Joshua 8:30 and 31. So we're at Mount Ebal. We should find some kind of sacrificial system there. All right, so here's what they found at Mount Ebal. Doesn't look like much, but a big pile of rocks. When they found this in the 1980s, they were kind of trying to discern what it was. Now, since then, some of this has been destroyed. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So, all right, so the Mount Ebal structure was found by a guy named Adam Zertal in the 1980, within a naturally shaped amphitheater. Excavations were conducted by the University of Haifa and the Israel Exploration Society. They lasted about 8 seasons between 1982 and 1989. Right, so they found it, they went in, started digging it out, and they were like, wow, this is cool. Right, this has some serious significance to it. So during the first phase of excavation, the stone pile was peeled off. There was just a pile of rocks. So the stone pile was peeled off, and below it, a 9 by 7 meter long structure was discovered. So 27 feet by 21 feet, roughly, give or take, right? Add a couple of feet on each one. Adjacent to which were 2 paved stone courtyards separated by a sloping wall, a ramp, that rose to the top of the building. The entire structure and the walls were built of field stones. Wait, field stones? So the building rose to a height of about 4 meters, so about 12 feet tall, and was paved with field stones. No entrance to the building was discovered. All right, so why is that important that these are field stones? Because what's a field stone? It's just a stone you find in the field. So it is an altar of uncut stones by which no man had wielded an iron tool. Okay? So we've got that, it matches. It's big, kind of like, well, altars. So this would be the circular altar at Mount Ebal. If you look at other altars that are found from around this time frame or shortly thereafter, and the way that it would work, especially when it comes to the sacrificial system, right? So you would have basically a ramp leading up to the top. At the top you would have the circular altar. Now below that you have the rectangular this, they found something really cool. They found an Egyptian scarab. What would somebody be doing with an Egyptian scarab at an altar to the Lord, you might ask? Well, they fled from Egypt and were given all kinds of things to take with them. You think somebody could just rock an Egyptian scarab? It kind of makes sense. And it's from the scarab is Moses III. Right, so the circular altar was first identified as Joshua's altar by Stephen Rudd in 2005. Stephen Rudd was one of the discoverers of the cursed tablet we'll talk about in a minute. So he's also a person who identified the scarab of Moses III, who some say is the Pharaoh at the Exodus. 2019? Yeah, that's when the cursed tablet was found. We'll talk about that in a minute, though. That one's pretty cool. So this is basically a representation, what they feel like the altar probably looked like, based on what they found. Right, so here's what they found. A large rectangular altar. Right, the most prominent feature is the large square altar measuring roughly 13 meters by 13 meters, standing about 10 feet tall. It was constructed of those unhewn field stones without mortar.
Just stacked.
Stacked on top of each other. Almost like it was done by people who knew how to do stuff like that. There was a ramp. The ramp is about 23 feet long. It's about 1.5 meters wide. It led up to the top of this large altar. The ramp would have allowed access to the altar for ritual purposes. Then there's a shelf. It's about 1 meter wide and 1 meter lower than the top. It surrounds the altar on 3 sides. A secondary narrow ramp led up to this altar. Then there was the top platform, or the bama. The top of the altar covered an area of about 8 meters by 7 meters. Served as the cultic platform. It was paved with medium-sized field stones. But there's even more than that, right? So all of this, it sounds like an altar on Mount Ebal, made of unhewn field stones. Kind of sounds like maybe we got something here, right? So outside of that, there's an inner chamber. So beneath the paved top platform, they've discovered earlier construction phases. An earlier, smaller, circular altar, that would be Joshua's altar, about 6 feet in diameter, was found beneath the center of the rectangular structure. The structure was filled with layers of stone and ash, including a significant amount of clear bone ash, such as would be found if somebody was burning an animal.
Was it human or animal sacrifice?
It says the ash layer was about 1.5 meters thick, 4.5 feet of ash, and both thick and clean ash, right? Which included a large amount of bone ash. Now, a lot of this is obviously animal. Right? So here's what Zertal believed. The excavating archaeologist Adam Zertal believed the site was the compound containing the biblical altar built by Joshua. According to the book of Joshua, chapter 8, the Israelites, under the leadership of Joshua, had built an altar on Mount Ebal, as had been instructed earlier by Moses. Right? So Moses says, hey Joshua, here's what we're going to do. Here's how you're going to make this thing. Right? You're going to make it on Mount Ebal. So it all kind of makes sense. During the ceremony that followed, Joshua renewed the covenant between Yahweh and the Israelites enacted on Mount Sinai. Right? So did the same kind of Mount Sinai to Mount Ebal, translated that over. Right? According to Zertal, it is possible to identify the structure as an altar because it closely matches biblical and Mishnaic descriptions of altars. So Zertal's belief is that this is the altar of Joshua. It is on Mount Ebal. Now, some of the things that go against that, it's on the right side. What do I mean by that? So with Mount Ebal, there's also Mount Gershom. Right? Blessings and curses. Blessings were done Mount Gershom, curses done on Mount Ebal. Well, the altar faces actually a third mountain. Now Zertal says, hey, maybe we've misidentified Mount Gershom in the Bible. Maybe this is Mount Gershom and this is Joshua's altar. Right? He's basically saying, we don't know, here's what we do know. We have an unhewn altar on the side of Mount Ebal, between it and another mountain. We know that much. We believe this to be Ebal, this to be Gershom, and this to be the third mountain. Maybe Gershom is actually this third mountain, and this is the third mountain. So, there are difficulties. I'm not saying that this is proof positive, but it does seem as though it is a possibility to posit this as Joshua's altar. Once again, none of this is proof positive and none of it states, see, the Bible is true because we have this piece of evidence. It's just another breadcrumb for us to go. You know, we're finding altars that look a lot like they're described in the Bible. Whether it's Joshua's altar or not, I don't know. But we do know we have an altar from that time frame made in the specifications that the Hebrew people made altars for the Mishnaic description. So we see evidence that they've come from Egypt. We see evidence that they have gone through the wilderness. Now we see evidence in the right time frame that they are in Canaan or Israel, as it would come to be known. So, to me, does it matter if this is the actual Joshua's, altar? No. What it does do is start to connect those dots. Starting to draw up a history of these peoples, right? We have earlier potsherds from them before Egypt. Then we have those same potsherds in Egypt. And then we have, again, new potsherds and new things that kind of put the same people going the same place. Which is, it's kind of drawing that historical map for us that we can see. So, in February 2021, a portion of the site was destroyed by municipal workers acting on behalf of the Palestinian Authority who removed stones making up part of the wall on one side of the archaeological site in order to pave a nearby road. So this incident followed zoning that placed the site in Area B under Palestinian jurisdiction, where previously the site had been in Area C under Israeli jurisdiction. So basically, lines got redrawn, and they said, oh, this is ours now. So you're not going to find really pre-2020, really. You're not going to find, or post-2020, you're not going to find new photos of said excavation site. So could there be more evidence there? Sure could. How long did it take us to find this evidence? It's found in 1980 and was buried somewhere around 1250. Yeah, that's a long time. Could there be more evidence under there that would point us to, yes, this is, or no, this isn't? Sure. Right? But we may never find out. because they are very strict in Palestine about allowing archaeology that would prove that that land is real from the get-go. Right? Because they want to say that they have no claim to that land. So, that leads me to the newer discovery. Now this one, I've read 2 papers in favor of this being what it is, and 2 papers in opposition to this being what it is. Doesn't seem to be a consensus amongst scholars whether this is real or not. However, if you go to any popular atheist blog site, you're going to find that they're going to cite from the 2 papers that are in opposition to this being the Mount Ebal curse tablet. If you go to a Christian or Jewish site, they're going to cite from papers that are in favor of. Do I know which one to believe? Nope. My point in bringing this up is not in saying whether this is a cursed tablet. If it were a cursed tablet, I would be 100% on that is the right place, and that yes, we have indeed misidentified Mount Gershon. Right? I'm kind of agnostic on it. The coolest part of this is that this is the earliest inscription we have of Yahweh, of the Tetragrammaton. Right? Earliest one we've got is on this tablet. Right? Whether you want to connect all the other dots and make it say what it says, that's up to whoever's deciphering the data. I am not an expert in that field. However, it clearly says Yahweh. So, I'm going with, I've at least got that much information. Again, we're putting the Israelite people where the Bible says they are at the time it says they are there. We're getting the history of the land right. How much other history is right in there as well. Alright, so the Mount Ebal lead tablet, also known as the Mount Ebal curse tablet, is a folded lead sheet reportedly found on Mount Ebal in the West Bank near Nablus in December of 2019. Artifact was discovered by a team of archaeologists led by Scott Stripling. Stripling's team claims it is the oldest known Hebrew inscription preceding the Khirbet Kayetha Ostrakhan by at least 2 centuries, with the curse tablet dating to around 1200 BC. Right? So previous to this, the earliest inscription we have of Yahweh is 1000. Now we're going to back that up 200 years. Should this tablet be true? The alleged inscription was published in May of 2023. Published and peer-reviewed. And so it's not one guy going, see, this is what it says. It's one guy going, this is what it says. It's another guy going, I agree. It's a third one going, yep. Right? Then it gets published. This isn't just one guy flying off the handle going, no, 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 no. Right? So, and that goes on both sides of this. This isn't one person with an axe to grind. It's scholarly consensus is a weird thing, right? It's a bunch of smart people getting together and separately, right? So paper gets written. The guy goes, this is my findings. Second one goes, I agree with your findings. The third one will go, I agree with your findings, and then they'll publish it. So these are smart people in all of this. How was writing done? How do people do it? What would it say? Is there a pathway on the sheet, right? Because left to right writing is a new thing, all right? People used to do right to left, and people used to do up to down. And other people did down to up. So, that's some people look at like cuneiform. because cuneiform sometimes at the bottom would be the beginning, and would go bottom to top. So weird. I don't know. I'm not an expert in the field. Not where my principal studies have ever been. So I'm going to go off of, we've got a bunch of experts on each side of this going, yes it is, no it isn't. Not my fight to fight. However, what we do have is one word in here. And it says, you are cursed by the God Yahweh, cursed. You will die, cursed, cursed, you will surely die. Cursed you are by Yahweh, cursed. And this is from Stripling and Gershon's paper on You are cursed by the God Yahweh, an early Hebrew inscription from Mount Ebal that was published in 2023. Right? So, to be honest, these guys took 4 years with this and said, this is what it says. Studied this and all of the writing that goes into it for 4 years before they ever published an article on it. And in less than 18 months, there have already been 2 rebuttal articles. And one saying, yeah, I agree. So, I don't know that anybody's put as much study into it as Stripling, but it could still be wrong. However, I want to highlight one thing, that YHW, right? Now, YHW is a shortened form of the Tetragrammaton. It's found elsewhere that they would just drop that second H. So, it is a normal shortened form. So, the use of the term Yahweh, which, if proved to be inscribed in the tablet, would be the oldest example of its appearance written in Paleo-Hebrew characters by centuries. As a Hebrew word for God would define the inscription as Hebrew and not Canaanite. Because the Canaanites were living in this area until the Hebrews basically pushed them out. Now, if this does have Yahweh on it, which I firmly believe it does, then that would be, this is actually a Hebrew inscription. So now we are putting the people in the land. Right? This isn't so much is this an actual curse tablet from Mount Ebal, in my view. I don't, okay, cool, we found Mount Ebal. Right? My question is are we able to place the Hebrew people in Israel in that century? Because if we can do that, we're starting to prove the history of the Bible. We're giving not just evidence for it, but actual proof. Okay, this is 13th, 14th century BC. It is on Mount Ebal, and it has Yahweh. Mount Ebal, let me see if I got a map of it. I thought I did, but all right. So Mount Ebal is, if you look at Israel, right, it's that coast there. It is the very top, very northern side, very eastern front of Israel, of the land that God had given to the Hebrew people. That is where Mount Ebal is. So it says that not only were they in the south part, we've got other evidences that show them in the southern part. They were all the way up in the northeastern portion of Israel. So if they made it there by 1300 BC, where were they before that? Well, they were in these southern portions, working their way up. So it just kind of gives us more evidence for what the Bible says. All right, so how did it get looked at? The same way. Same way they did with that silver tablet we talked about, or silver annual we talked about. They did X-ray tomography. Right? It was undertaken in collaboration with scientists at the Academy of Sciences of the Czech Republic, including Ivana Kupov, Yaroslav Valak, and Daniel Vavrik. 2 epigraphers were enlisted to examine the scans for discernible letters. Peter Gert van der Veen and of Johannes Gutenberg Universiteit at Mainz and Gershon Gale of Haifa University. There's a lot of weird names, not weird names, right? These are their names. I don't know how to pronounce them, but we're not just getting people from the Hebrew University involved now. This is becoming a worldwide study project. We've got one group doing all of the, okay, let's figure out what it actually looks like. Let's get a full 3D scan of it. This is what it looks like unfolded. Okay, now let's get epigraphers, right? People who, they study how people wrote in this time. Let's get epigraphers onto it so they can figure out what letters are discernible. Okay, now let's translate those letters. So now they've got translators as well. And those people are going, this is what it says. Stripling goes, okay, I agree if these letters are, in this order. That is what it says. Puts it in his paper. Did he actually do all of that? No, his team did. Right? Where's his team from? Germany, right? Czech Republic, and Israel. Doesn't sound like it's a one-man show here that's coming up with this is the translation. Right? One of the papers I looked at, it was kind of a one-man show. Right? So what did this thing look like actually?
That was the size of it? Right there in his hand?
Yeah, this is the tablet, this is both sides, that's kind of a side view of it. That's how big it is in somebody's hand. It's this big. He tried to fold it open and broke off a corner of it. And they utilized that corner to date it. It did not do any damage to writing or anything like that, but they used that corner to do the dating of it. So it's kind of neat to really think about it, right? They're doing something called wet sifting. Oh, so this is the characters that they've discerned on the sheet, right? See some actual characters, some of it is like, stick figures. Looks like there could be writing on top of writing. So they are discerning all of this in every direction. But this is kind of what it looks like unfolded. Heck, if I could tell you that that's what that says, I'm going to trust the experts. And there are experts who say that's what it says, and there are experts who say, no, you really got to dance a little jig to get there. However, Yahweh, I'll do it on this side, it's a second. Yahweh made it on the top. Up on the top, what would that be? Left corner for y'all. That's the one thing that has been discerned for me that I'm like, okay, they're pretty sure on that. Thus meaning, we do have proof that the Hebrew people were in northeastern Israel in the 13th, late 14th, early 13th century BC. That's kind of neat. I guess it will be late 13th century, early 14th century BC, right? Somewhere in that time frame. That's kind of cool. Oh, I didn't talk about how they found it. So, now here's kind of how they found it. Now, it was in what's called a dump, or garbage dump. There's a technical word for it, but it's basically where everybody threw stuff away, a refuse heap. So Stripling had come up with something called wet sifting. And it was a way in which they were able to get everything wet to wash away any dirt, so you'd be able to see things as they were going through. This was something they found, and this dump is not far from the Mount Ebal altar.
It's setting up like a landfill.
So they've got the dump, they go through and they find stuff like that, right? It's not the only thing they found other things, but this was kind of the big dog of their discoveries, if you will, right? Is they find this tablet that's just, it's lead. And they're like, well, I don't know. Is it anything? No. It's a lead tablet folded up. That's what it is. So that's when they do all the study on it. I remember when this was found, it was right before COVID. And then got its x-rays, got all that, and then it took 4 years from me hearing about them find this thing to hearing the closing study on it in 2023. But this is kind of this is one of those really cool discoveries that get found that you just don't think about. But yeah, this was found by wet sifting, and it's something that's still kind of new and still kind of we're not sure if we like it or not, but they liked it enough to do it once and found this. But yeah, do I believe that these are Hebrew structures and Hebrew things? Yes. Am I certain that this is Joshua's Mount Ebal altar and that this is a cursed tablet? I am not. I don't know of anybody that is 100% certain on those two things, except maybe Stripling, because he has studied it a lot more in depth than I have. So, but I just think these two are really cool because they put the Jewish people where the Bible says they're going to be, when it says they're going to be there, and doing the things that it says they're going to be doing. We do see sacrifices happening on the mount, right, on that altar. Right? That's where the bone ash is coming from. We do see, it's not just bone ash, but you've also got plants and things like that, right? And the entire sacrificial system that's put in place in the books of Moses are taking place on Mount Ebal. So, but yeah, I thought these were really cool finds. Maybe someday somebody will be able to convince me one way or the other whether they're 100% certain. However, I don't think that's going to be today. I just don't think I can know enough to know that kind of certainty. All right. Questions? I want to see one of these.
Is that the only tablet they found?
Huh?
Refugee?
Say what?
Is that the only tablet they found in the refugee?
It's the only one that I know of that they found in the refuse heap. I don't know if they kept digging afterwards or not, or what. But
If I remember correctly, in order to do any sort of archaeology dig, they have to present what they're going to do, and they were only allowed to look through the refuse heaps. They weren't digging in the area.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
They were only allowed access to the refuse heaps, and that's for a short amount of time, which is why they did the wet sand, the wet sifting technique
Yep.
to even get sort through it quickly.
But yeah. No, they only had one season in which they could do it, and there were a whole lot of restrictions placed on because it is under Palestinian control. So,
Who has possession of those items now?
I believe University of Haifa.
Okay. So it's in Israeli hands, not Palestinian.
Yes. The tablet is. The temple is not. Or the altar is way up north and on the east side. Remember, the boundary is right here. Israel comes down here. Remember, it comes all the way down here. So it's way up here. All the way north, and it's on the eastern half, we'll call it that. So, but, all right. coming.
Yay. Close. And
Love
X.
archaeology.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.